Thank you. Hi, everyone. On that note of the meetup thing, at that same location tonight, we are going to be doing a little sort of casual meetup get-together to chat more about location-based games and location-based storytelling starting at around 6 o'clock. So you guys are welcome to come and join us there and continue the conversation. And I'll remind you again at the end. So come find us in the wrap-up room after for where that location is, I guess. Cool. That's not what I want to do. That's what I want to do. So my name is Lucas Johnson. Hi. I run a company called Silverstring Media. We do narrative design and consulting and things, and have over the last couple of years been embarking on the location-based game journey, doing specifically location-based games at events. And so we wanted to talk about how to tell stories in location-based games. Again, there is an evaluation that we ask that you please fill out because it's very useful to all of us. You know the deal if you've been to GDC before. So with the explosion of Pokemon Go in this past year, it's brought location-based gaming sort of into the limelight. But it hasn't started with Pokemon Go. There's been sort of location-based gaming for decades. Everything from alternate reality games to, we're seeing the explosion of escape rooms now too, interactive theater. There's all sorts of sort of interesting ways that you can create stories and gameplay in real physical spaces. And when we talk about this, and it's anywhere from Pokemon Go, which is everywhere in the world, to an escape room, which is a specific room, we have a very broad range of types of experiences that we might want to talk about, might want to tell stories in. And they're all use similar design ideas, storytelling functions, stuff like that are similar across all of these types of games, though of course there are differences. And really when we're looking at this range, the question is, how specific is the location? And that makes a big difference in the kinds of experiences you can create. So to discuss these stories, we've brought together this awesome panel that has joined me from a very wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, which is super exciting. Unfortunately, if you were looking at the website ahead of time or the paper thing, Sarah Thatcher is unable to join us on the panel after all, but she is being replaced by Jenny here, who is awesome. And Sarah will be hopefully hanging out at the wrap-up room after or the meetup tonight, so you can talk to her then as well. But let's just quickly go down the line to introduce our panel. Just state name, who you are, and the kind of thing that you work on. Jeff.
I'm Jeff Macpherson. I'm the creative director and co-founder of Motive.io, and it's a platform launching at GDC that makes it easy to build location AR games. And that platform came about from our first location AR game, Code Runner, which was in 2011.
Steve Peters, I'm founder and CCO of No Mimes Media. Formerly done some work for Niantic the last year, which you may have heard of them, a little Pokemon Go thing. They continue to be a client. Have been working mostly in the alternate reality gaming space, but also more recently getting into a lot of the geolocation games in the last 5 years, augmented reality, that kind of stuff. Really whatever, doing cool stuff in relation to locations. That's kind of what we've always been doing.
My name is Jenny Gottstein. I work for the Go Game, and we've been designing interactive adventure games since 2001. So our games then look a little different than what they look like now. We used to use payphones and those Nokia brick phones, and now we use all sorts of devices. And we can turn buildings, neighborhoods, multiple cities at once into epic games with actors and interactive content, and we run them all around the world. So I design those games. I also manage our game design team and come up with new game concepts like the zombie apocalypse disaster preparedness games and any number of applied play game types.
I'm Rob Morgan. I'm a writer, and I am co-founder and creative director of Playlines, and we make interactive, site-specific, augmented reality theater in AR, using location-based data to make site-specific installations that users walk around, usually using a mix of smartphone audio and real-world actors to do immersive VR theater experiences.
Awesome. So you can see a wide variety of experience from lots of different kinds of games, which is super cool. And one of the reasons that I wanted to keep this panel sort of a bit more of a discussion than little micro talks and stuff like that, so we can try to get some interesting conversations going on. So to start that conversation, I think the most important question we have to look at when we're talking about storytelling for real locations is why? Why do we do this? Why do we take games from the computer screen out into the real world where there are people looking at you?
Okay, so I've been talking about and trying to push location-based, specifically audio AR for a long time, and that conversation suddenly got a lot easier about 9 months ago for some reason. And then suddenly it was easy to give an obligatory Pokemon Go meets description of what we were doing. And the reason I'd been pushing it for years when we had to try and make it work with GPS, which only sort of worked, was that I just really love tweaking context. And I really love the idea, especially because the other half of my job is writing for VR. I really love how easy it is to get users immersed in something where you don't work with opacity and replace the whole world with a virtual one, but instead you just add digital elements to change people's relationships with their actual environment and with their walk to the shops with Pokemon Go, or for us with like a specific venue. You change people's perceptions of people around them. And I really like how you can recruit in elements of set dressing or even the other people in the scene without them even knowing, but turn them into something that makes the user feel like they're being watched or feel like they're being more self-conscious than they would be otherwise. So it's kind of like a newer form of context hacking. That's what I really like about using real places.
Did you say context hacking?
Yes.
That's cool.
It's an art term from like the 90s, I think. But yeah, I'm bringing it back. Right.
Yeah, it's like reality enhancement.
Right.
Really, when you're in the middle of a game like that, everything is brighter because anything can happen, and you're not sure what's a part of it, what isn't. And I think that rush is as compelling for the players as it is. And sorry if I'm putting words in your mouths, but I think it's as compelling for us too. As one thing that we commented on. It's fun when the game games the game designer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
That never happened.
apparently it only happens to me. And no, but there's this sense of kind of lawlessness where you're going out there with a design, but you have no idea what's actually going to happen. There are so many factors, and all of a sudden, as the designer, you are also in a game. And I think that is maybe why we make ourselves why we're a glutton for punishment, why we decide to design real-world games and not games that are a little more controllable.
Yeah.
It's kind of like jazz, right? It's kind of like a call and response. It's
Yeah.
kind of like stand-up comedy in a lot of ways. For me, the reason why is in a lot of this stuff, almost every project I've worked on, the goal has been to make the player feel like the story is taking place in the actual world that they live in, as opposed to on a screen somewhere, whether it's in your hand or whether it's on your TV or something like that. And recently with technology, that's become, I won't say easier, but it's become more interesting, and the possibilities have expanded there. But I mean, that's a win, right? When we can turn the world around us into a play space. And I'm a big advocate of public play, and this has always just been. When you can be walking down the street and all of a sudden the game literally reaches out and grabs you, whether it's a phone call, that's what got me into it, was my phone rang on the way to lunch one day in 2001, and it was the Beast alternate reality game calling me. Literally, I wasn't expecting it, and I forgot about lunch. I ran back into my office, got online to see what was going on, and I thought, they're onto something here, and the rest is history.
It's like, it's so personal. It feels like such a personal experience. I know a lot of you guys use audio in your games. It's like being a part of a magic club. Like each player has their own little secret. With Pokemon, that was the first time that I ever felt like, whoa, there's other humans here who are doing it too. That was remarkable. But prior to that, you've got this secret that is In our game, you were a spy, and you're hearing the voice of your handler constantly feeding you information, knowing what's going on around you. Similar, like to I guess turn-by-turn GPS, except this was be careful, make sure no one's watching. There might be someone across the street. That park, he was last seen at the park, and you're like, there is a park. How did he know? So comes from pulling map data and GPS data, and it's so uncontrolled. You have this factor that's so uncontrollable that your writing has to be very careful, like a psychic cold reading is a very good technique, in that you suggest something rather than laying down a fact that could be wrong that will break the narrative and break the person out of it. So you might see somebody, you might see this, you might see that. But one of the things we would do is you might see somebody going for a coffee. That guy or that girl was last, seen handing off documents to a spy. But we know that you're by Starbucks. We don't mention that. So that we're
So
like,
of course there's people with coffee.
wow. Yeah, and you're rendering it in your head. So it's a very, very personal experience.
Well, and you mentioned something else that's really interesting is that social aspect. I mean, we all probably saw when Pokemon Go came out, whether or not you played it, suddenly seeing people in the same space together. I remember going down to the beach and a couple teenagers walked by and said, hey, there's a, Dragonite down there. And it's like, thanks, running to the beach, right? It becomes this very social experience, right?
Yeah.
I will add that the one thing about the why is, for me, I'm seeing, with the proliferation of things like escape rooms and things like that, I feel like the pendulum is starting to swing a little bit away from, digital to more experiential. People want to do things that they can, now we got this little computer in our pocket and we can do cool, amazing things, but we want to, now folks are really kind of wanting to go organic and take that next step and get out into the real world and doing things that are tangible. And so I think that's why escape rooms are getting so popular. That's why Go Gaming continues to go strong after all these years. And that's what's really exciting. I've got great stories about, the literal walking down the street and something happens to you out of the blue and you're like, all of a sudden you're a superhero in a game or you're a spy. And that's awesome. That's awesome.
There is another factor here, which is that reality is cheap and plentiful, and it has
great resolution.
Yeah.
It has great graphics, and it rarely glitches out. And that means that, if you can just manipulate the player's imagination, and like Jeff was saying, the player fills in the blanks and can start telling themselves a story if you just give them the right kind of cues, and then they're telling themselves an incredibly vivid story that you didn't have to simulate or pay for or virtualize.
And you're tapping into, there's emotional baggage or there's memories,
right,
especially when it's in someone's own neighborhood that you get to ride for free on. Instead of, when they pay $1 million for a Beatles song and a soundtrack, it's not because it's $1 million song, it's because they're trying to tap into all of that nostalgia that this audience has. And you kind of get that, you get that for free. You have someone saying, wow, at that swing set that my dad taught me at, hey, Beast came up and I taunted him with,
So we're talking about storytelling in these kinds of games, and we're looking at, Pokemon Go and escape rooms and stuff. Does Pokemon Go have a story?
Light story, it's about a light game mechanic, right? You're a trainer, and the story is you're collecting Pokemon. I mean, that's pretty much it, right? Unless there's.
Can I poll the audience? I'm really curious about that. We should.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, put up your hand if you think Pokemon Go has a story.
Controversial.
Not a lot.
I would say it makes you tell yourself a story, and that's the really powerful thing that it does. And that story can be as in-depth as you like, and you can engage with it at the level that you want. But also, the story that it gets you telling yourself is not incompatible with your immediate reality. And so, it makes you. If it can make you take the long road to the shops, even though you only want a loaf of bread, then it's doing that for emotional reasons, because of competition or game design or something that it's making you do for an emotional reason that makes your interaction with the real world less optimal but more fun. At that point, I think that's a narrative of some kind.
Totally. Well, and I saw Sarah in the back put her hand up to that question, and I know a point that she had made. Is that these kinds of stories are experiential. These are the stories of you, the player, and your experience in this space. So it isn't always, though often has some element of true sort of authored narrative, but it isn't always about that, but it still has that sort of experiential story that I think is really key in bringing in that emotional response, as you guys were talking about.
And then also don't forget the story that happens between, so often, you can play with friends or new friends, and you create your own story, there are moments where you reflect on, oh, remember that one time where we did that thing? And so you're building your story in real time with the help of the game. So I think there's multiple storylines to take into consideration and to really celebrate and kind of fan the flames, not knowing where it may go.
So one of the things, the big major design challenge, the first sort of design challenge that you have to think about when doing a location-based game, I think, is how do you motivate someone to actually get up and go outside?
Oof, yeah. So it varies on the context of the game. So if it's a group activity that everyone has opted into, you don't need to motivate. I mean, everyone has created this social contract, so they're self-motivated. If you are trying to pull people out of their day-to-day and draw them into the game, you have to use different mechanics to do that. So I think the first question you ask yourself is this like a ready-made experience, or as part of the game, am I also recruiting people to buy in? And that requires different nuance in how the narrative gets rolled out, if there is a narrative.
Well, even with something like an escape room where there's that, you have already sort of bought into this
Right.
experience, I think there's still even that extra level of now you're in the room, but we need to actually make you care. I mean, presumably you want to be there, but there's still that extra, especially if you're trying to do any kind of storyline, right?
I would say that, yeah, that's the key is you're there. When you're there anyway, we want to make you care. And I think with the question of how do you get people outside was a huge issue because, right, it's the balance of the reward. Is it worth it for me to get up off my couch and go outside to do this thing as opposed to I just want to be able to do it here? And lots of stories from Pokemon Go of people realizing, wait, I got to go out, I got to go do this? My avatar's not moving. How do I do this? So, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. And to me, it's a balance. It's like, one, there's gameplay that's casual when you're out and about anyway, right? Oh, I'm at the bank or I'm at the diner. Let's see if there's any Pokemon around here. And then as you get deeper and deeper into it, and then as you get more into the game and it kind of hooks you, then you will purpose yourself to go out, and then you will find yourself. Pokemon Go is a textbook example of this. Lightning in a bottle, right? Yeah. It's like, now it's a social phenomenon. Now I'm going to go out and we're going to play with friends. But it was that initial of, I'm going to go out and play, and sure, there were people that immediately went outside, but the whole point is it's this kind of, you got to have both, and Pokemon had the IP advantage.
Right.
The nostalgia of that. A lot of things came into factor. The AR thing and sharing it on social media. People saw Pokemon on the kitchen counter and wondered, how do I do that? And
Right.
they download the app and they initially play it as they're out and about. And then as they got deeper into the game and enjoyed it, then they started to want to go out and do it. So
Right.
it's this checks and balance between those two.
And that built-in screen grab, being able to take a picture, I think was just marketing genius.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. You saw the image and you got it right away.
Because they didn't do a lot of traditional marketing. It was almost solely social media. It
Right.
really went viral, and it was those AR screenshots that caught on.
Magikarp in the frying pan.
Yeah.
Because we do site-specific stuff, I think we have like a different experience of this, because a lot of what we do is like do a fictional lair or a game lair that takes place within a conference or takes place within a festival. And so a lot of the time we actually design our experiences to make our existing players, the people who are already on the experience, the best advert for the experience for everybody else. Because like 5%, 10% of the attendees will be playing it at any given time, but our players are walking around with headphones on. And we're also, in the course of the story we're telling them, getting them to do slightly weird things that make them stand out a little bit, making them feel natural about doing the weird thing, and that it makes sense to them in the context of the story. But other people walking past are like, those guys know something that we don't. And that's really interesting. Then they get motivated. So we create like VIP areas that you can only get to if you know the password, and you only know the password if you get to the end of the story in the audio. And so people walk past at a technology festival and there's a bouncer and a velvet rope and they don't know what's going on. And the only way to get in on it is to run our experience. That works really well in terms of pushing people back into our experiences. But it only works because we're site-specific.
Well, and I want to get into sort of, a lot of the specifics, narrative best practices and stuff, but one of the other sort of major concerns that you have to think about even up front is this, now that we're in the physical world, what kinds of things do we need to think about that we wouldn't need to think about if we're just making a mobile game or we're just making a computer game or something? And I'm going to bring up Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, which was another tip from Sarah. But so in most games, we don't need to worry about the bottom of that pyramid, which are like the base needs of of being human. You know, you're sitting at your computer, you're going to be safe. If you need to pause and go to the bathroom, you can do that. But in a physical space, suddenly you need to think about these other questions.
Yeah, I can say we really encountered that in terms of as we were developing our first location AR game. The assumption that this is going to be a physical space, we'll make it the lock and key mechanic of you're going to go here, you're going to go to a bank. You were a hacker, much like Watch Dogs, but location-based and before Watch Dogs. And you're like, I can't get into the bank, you don't have the code. Oh, I remember, I'm going to go now over to this location, the Starbucks. And I'm going to run my little hacking mini game, and I'm going to get the key. And I'm going to go back. And the moment we tested it, we were in big trouble. Because there's nothing, you know, when you're playing a point and click, kind of like, oh, that's the lock. I remember the key's over here. Click, or you know, or navigate with your controller. That's not a lot of effort. When you've walked 2 blocks with no gameplay, and you stop, and you're like, go turn around, go back, and you're like, you would not believe how awful that is as an experience. Like just even when you forget your keys and you're embarrassed, and you don't want anyone to notice that you're turning around, and nobody cares what you're doing. But then imagine that you've kind of got this narrative going on, and it was a deal breaker, and it was like, oh, that was our assumption. Right?
Yeah, no, and that's something that we bake into all of our games, that travel has to be less than a fourth of the experience. And if you travel, you know, to get from point A to point B, and if you have to make people travel, you have to fill that time with something that will keep them alight, you know, whether it be I Spy missions that they're using the physical environment to find things, so they're looking up and out, or something that they're discussing and negotiating amongst their team, or something that they're doing to prepare for the mission that's ahead. And then the other piece of just very boring logistical location-based game stuff, we always, when the players are opting in and we can touch them before the game, so we're not just pulling them in and they start playing, we always send out something that primes them for dressing comfortably and weather appropriately, because if you are uncomfortable, you will have less fun. That's directly related. So we try to get people, without spoiling the surprise, and it takes different shapes depending on the game, how you communicate that information. We try to do it as cheeky as possible, but you have to make sure your audience is ready physically and emotionally and spiritually for the task ahead, or else they're gonna opt out.
Yeah. I'd say from my perspective, you just got to really be careful with the whole win state, fail state. And going off of what you were saying, I mean, yeah, if you show up and it's like, crap, I forgot that key, now I got to walk back 2 blocks. You know, that's terrible. There's got to be an alternative, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe I forgot that, but now there's another way I can do it without having to retrace my steps, right? Maybe there's another mini game where it makes whatever I had to do a little bit more difficult, but I don't have to like go back, or you can't die in these games, you know, that's the whole issue too. It's like, well, it's not like a typical, I'm playing Fallout and great, now I died and I just go back to the last save point. There are no save points.
No spawn point.
There's no spawning.
Yet.
You know, yet. Well, yeah.
That'd be cool.
So, although, yeah.
Well, and I think, you know, and looking at the hierarchy of needs, I think that's might be why most escape rooms are, you know, around an hour in length, because otherwise you need to think about the need to go to the washroom.
Well, I was going to say, we actually often, our experiences take people into the bathroom of wherever the venue is, because it's nice to kind of go into a space and you don't normally get told a story in there, but we can have a virtual lair that happens in there, and like we've done that.
What kind of stories are you telling in there?
We've had them that like you get taken in for a sexual encounter, or like someone goes in and then they're like, this is the kind of the moment in the story where a character breaks down and you listen to them kind of confessing something or being very upset.
And then they use a restroom?
Well, this is the thing. Like originally it was kind of, should we build in a bathroom break? Because the player is walking past, and if they go in, then they'll go off story. So we build it in for that reason. But it ended up being a really intimate and intense experience for people standing in the bathroom, listening to that was when we do the most intense moments in the story.
Or sitting.
Right. Well, yeah. And like, but that's the ideal, is if the player is kind of there in a private space, or they're staring at themselves in the mirror, that's an enhancement. And also, yeah, it's an opportunity to actually create the possibility of the player not having to abandon the experience partway through to go to the bathroom. It's built in.
Right. Well, then that leads really well into sort of the next point that I wanted to make is, okay, so we're choosing to tell stories in the real world, using the real environment. So how do we do that? How do we use the environment to enhance the stories that we're telling? I mean, the bathroom's a perfect example.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's an accident first, and then you're like, oh, you can use the environment that way. So this one game that we have, it's an espionage training game. So in the course of the game, the players are learning how to become world-class spies, a la, 007 Mata Hari, Archer, etc. And in the beginning of the game, we give them a couple of things that they need to be aware of. And one, we say, all right, well, there's someone out in the field who's trailing you, and if they capture you on film, and if we see that film, meaning the actor sends it to us, then we will dock your team X amount of points. So like, watch your back, it creates the look over the shoulder function. And I ran this one game in Santa Monica, and I forgot to hire that actor. Like, I just spaced. There was other things going on, didn't hire that actor, so there was nobody walking around taking pictures of the teams, but they still got that thing. Yes. But it's in Santa Monica, and there are tourists everywhere.
Right.
So every time a tourist would take a photo, the whole team would hit the deck. and so we realized, actually, you know what, you don't have to hire an actor if you just put it in a well-trafficked area where people are snapping away.
Cool.
Yeah, so like the environment will leap out at you sometimes when you least expect it.
Espionage is a great genre for location-based as well, I've noticed.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things about that is just that it doesn't conflict with reality, right? When you're a spy. And the stakes are so high in espionage drama, right? There's one or two people that are playing out basically superpowers at war. And paranoia is very easy. Well, I wouldn't say easy. Yeah, why not? It's easy to create in a location-based game when you're a good writer like you guys.
Yeah. I tend to start all of our experiences with something like, are they still watching? Or like something that kind of doesn't give you a lot of story, but it puts the player in a heightened state and makes them more aware. And yeah, after a while, you don't need the actor there. Like, that's such a cool story. It's a great example.
Learn from my mistakes.
Well, and it's easy to do. It's easier, perhaps, to use the environment in the specific story when you know what exactly the environment is. You're doing something where you know that there's a bathroom literally right there on the route.
Our tech director, Dustin, is here, and he had a great phrase that what we do is often like reverse level design, in that we kind of have to go to a venue beforehand and walk around, or take a GoPro and walk around and then kind of see what story emerges from the space, which sounds very kind of wishy-washy, but really it's the best way to go, oh, there's a phone booth there and it's out of use, but we can definitely use that and drive the player that way. And what are the natural geographical forks in this environment to create an interactive decision where you go this way or that way? But that's an opportunity that we have that if you're doing like map API stuff, you can't necessarily do.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, for the stuff I've done, it's been mostly site-specific. Most of the stuff for alternate reality games or whatever, it's been like, and there's always going out to scout the location and immersing yourself there and seeing what the location has to offer. Sometimes you'll have to do it remotely. I've gotten really, really good at Google Earth and different other tools at your disposal, but there's nothing beats actually being, boots on the ground, to see what's there, and also to talk to people. You get and really opportunities present themselves that you never would have been able to research ahead of time.
Yeah.
So, but then making something that has to be a little bit not site specific.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like I always thought that having that kind of controlled environment, knowing where the environment that it's going to take place in was going to solve all our problems. Until I met you guys, and I realized you guys have a lot of the same problems
And brand new problems.
and a whole brand new problems. Whereas what we were doing is, our games. It was adapting to wherever you were in the world, and so we had a system set up where the writer would decide, okay, well, this is sort of about a crooked cop who's laundering money, so I'm going to have a first choice, second choice, third choice, fifth choice. In terms of what's in the vicinity within, say, a 200-meter radius. Is there a police station? Then I'm going to call that number one, bump that to the top, and it will call up audio specific to that. It's not really a branch. It's just adapting. It'll say the cop's got he's laundering money and he's got a stash there. Go break into the system of the police station. Not a lot of police stations around. Not a lot of hospitals around. The A list of the locations that I would like to push to that player in real time. So then we go down to, okay, is there a pool hall? Is there things that are traditionally associated with
Shadier
activities. I'm sure there's very classy pool halls. Arcades used to be classy, and it goes down the list. And we're like, okay, a bank. Okay, then maybe a church. And then we're like, I don't really want people going to a church and then hearing audio saying there's a crooked cop that works out of that church. We'll nix that. But what that approach does, which is it's very exciting, as a writer and a developer, is that you kind of have this magic level designer, which is the world, which is tinkering with your levels, and you can fire up your game and play that mission and go, wow, like, it's unbelievable. He's running a racket. You know, this cop runs a money laundering out of a laundry, that's number one, and then a car wash, and he funnels the money from here to there. And now, what's interesting is that it was a very niche game, right? And we're actually suggesting that there's criminal activity happening at real locations. As Pokemon has brought this really to the mainstream, there's another responsibility we have to take is, although it feels cool for the player, we are kind of casting a narrative on top of a business that's not opted into it.
And we're gonna touch on those ethical issues and stuff in a sec, but you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add, just keep in mind though, I mean, we're talking mostly like GPS location. Remember, there's a lot of different sensors in the phone they can also use in the location. I mean, what if it's not just, oh, there's a park nearby, but, oh, taking into account the time of day or the temperature of where you are, you know, what if some Pokemon only showed up when the temperature was like below 40 degrees? Or, you know, if you're up a certain elevation, or if it's a really quiet environment or a really loud environment. I mean, there's all sorts of other cues from the location that you can then gather and bring into your game to affect the gameplay. And, you know, it can sense, I mean, even with a narrative, great, how awesome would it be to know the narrative knows that it's starting to drizzle.
Yeah.
You know, it's starting to rain, and during the rain, I mean, that's even from one of the ARGs we did back in the day, we had a blogger girl who was talking about driving up into the mountains outside of Portland to go do this thing, get the MacGuffin. And she mentions in it that she's a little worried because it's starting to snow outside. And one of our players from Portland says as he read that, he looked outside and it was starting to snow because we wrote that in real time based on the weather information that we had. And it was just those little touches that, again, make it feel like this story is really going on in the actual world that I live in.
And you could tap into, you know, there's APIs, there's data coming from dark sky, and so hyper-local weather.
Yeah.
And not to pitch my own company, but we can provide that for you.
I like. Oh no.
Well, I think as these games become more pervasive, as we have more players out in the world playing actively, I think the next frontier is using one game as the environment for another game. And one experience that I had, I was walking up a hill in San Francisco, at the height of everyone on their phones, Pokemon Go, and I was the only one going up the hill, and I could see people come down the hill, and they were coming in waves, right? They were with their friends on Pokemon, like heads down, like using their phone, and they were coming at me, and all of a sudden it was like, oh shit, I'm in asteroids, like, kind of upstream salmon swimming, the Pokemon players, and it became my game. And so I think finding ways to it's like tides, right? It creates these eddies that you wouldn't have anticipated. So how can we really play with those eddies that happen naturally or through game design?
I think social attunement and like attenuation is one of the easiest things to manipulate in people, and it creates the most immediate effect in the same way that, like, saying to you, if we were going to make everybody go around the room and turn and shake everybody's hand who's sitting next to all of you, that would make this situation really awkward, and then it would completely change your relationship with your immediate context. And that's something that I want to do more and more with our games. Like, a data set that we can scrape off the phone is how many other people are playing the game nearby within a radius of 10 meters. And at that point, we can start generating impromptu flash mobs, because the most significant part of the set dressing is the presence of other people, because humans are really, really attenuated to the presence of other people and whether they're watching and what they're doing and whether they're watching me and am I being weird. If you can get the player thinking about that stuff, then you can put them in a really interesting predicament, and then that enhances your story. Or you can play a game that takes place in your context that the other people were not even aware of, but they're enhancing your experience of the real world. That's a really cool one.
So obviously we can talk about this stuff all day, and we have for the last couple days. So, please join us later to continue the conversation. But I do want to touch on, while we're still on narrative best practices, the use of audio, because that's come up a couple times, and I know a lot of what several of us have used for telling the story. And this comes to the question of, do you want to create a game where your players are doing this as they're walking through this environment? We're using the environment to help tell the story. We want to make sure that the player is engaging with it. So you do that a lot with Motive.
Yeah, we have a best practice. We have a warning we call the desk bias, or the desktop bias, which is you're inevitably going to be developing this sitting at your desk, and you're looking at that screen and going to want to iterate on it to make it prettier and prettier and prettier. And and the end result can be that you've got a player, you've designed a lot of visual cues, it's staring at their phone, and it just takes away from the whole experience. And it's frustrating. I remember testing when that rain is hitting the screen, and you're trying to understand some character's motivation, it's not quite clear, and you're like, "What? This sucks." So it's so critical to just keep going out there and keep going out there. And I think the beauty about audio is it's heads up, and that does bring up one other point, which is when you use audio as your main way of telling your narrative. The other forms, of communicating, and particularly text or found documents, they drop in hierarchy. And plot points and plot twists and clever things that we thought the player would figure out by reading get completely lost. And you guys have found that as well?
Keep the story as simple as possible when you're out there.
As we get onto pitfalls to avoid, keep it simple.
Audio is cheap and really effective, and it's often not incompatible with the user's experience of the real world around them. Like if you have ever been walking down the street listening to something on your headphones and the right song comes on at the right moment, that your reality is being augmented. At that point, I don't really care what the data set is. That's augmented reality, and humans are really susceptible to having their reality augmented. And we just try and recreate that. The heads-up effect of audio is really, really important. And also, like, you can do things that don't have to be physically possible. They're as real and vivid as the player's imagination. Like, that's why I love audio.
Yeah, no, I think and music, because when we say audio, well, we're often talking about narrative, go over here, or this is happening, but music is absolutely another character in the experience. And as you guys are going out and designing, think of music as this tone setter, and it can do really interesting things with how scenarios are interpreted. So in our games, often, in some of our games, we'll take the media that the players create, and in front of them, if we all come back after the game, we're live mixing sound effects and music to the photos and videos that they've already taken. And the video originally may be something that's quite somber, but the minute that you overlay the Andy Griffith theme, it is a completely different experience. Or, if someone's boxing and you throw on Rocky and their face melt. So it's something where I think we think of it as kind of this orchestral background, but it really does push narrative forward in ways that may be underexplored.
So moving forward on sort of pitfalls to avoid, we've talked about some of these things already in the conversation, not wanting to be embarrassed by what you're doing, keeping the story simple because people will lose a lot of details, not asking them to do too much or motivating them properly to get up and go. So rather than sort of go through some more generics, can I get a brief example from each of you of something to avoid doing that you've
A ticking clock where someone has to get to a location, particularly if they're out in the wild, there's vehicles. It's just too dangerous, and you have a responsibility. People will already kind of be in this world and going after this objective and be motivated to move and step out, and So it's a tough one because it's a nice go-to to be like, gotta get there before the clock runs out.
That's a good one, Steve.
Specific pitfalls?
Yeah.
Don't tell your players to dress up like the Joker and go to the mall. Because they'll shut the mall down and
That happened to you,
police
right?
will come. Yes. Well, not being personal, but
But you had players doing that, yeah.
from what I hear, yes.
Okay. On the advice of counsel, I declined to answer.
Yes, there's a lot, yes.
I think a pitfall is to assume that you're not going to make mistakes as the designer, or you and your production team are going to do everything flawlessly. Never happens. And also, learn to kind of enjoy it. There was one epic mix-up that was very entertaining for me, and I think it was sort of entertaining for the players, but we had a game in Vegas, and it's illegal to take photos and videos on the casino floor, so that was off limits for a lot of the play. So we put a lot of our actors in rooms in the hotels. And one mission, teams had to go to a room, and they walked in, and they were gonna get grilled on sports trivia. So we had an actor in there wearing a ref's shirt and a whistle and was just ready to get in there. And then another room, they were told that a crime had just happened there, and they had to go, and they couldn't touch anything, but they had to scan the crime scene for clues, and then get out. And then, unbeknownst to them, 20 minutes later, they would be drilled on the details of the room. But they also didn't know that we'd hidden a guy in the closet to jump out, and he was dressed he was horrifying. He was so scary. And so they were supposed to kind of like sneak around and then get freaked out. But I switched, or the keys got switched, right? So the wrong actor went to the wrong room. And so the team expecting sports stats got scared, by this guy in a closet, and then the crime scene kids were getting grilled on like baseball things. So, to this day, I don't think they knew anything went wrong. But
fill in
just
the
roll with
blanks.
it.
right. So Pitfalls, I think if you can design in such a way where if nothing goes as planned, it still keeps the magic going. If you only design in one direction, and if the lock doesn't pick or the person doesn't show up, then it all breaks.
Your player characters have no AI. That's the problem. They're humans, and you have no. That's the craziest thing. You're like, no, you're not. Why are you doing that? There's nothing about this game that means you're supposed to do that. You're like, I just wanted to go this way.
Well, and that speaks to this question of, in video games, traditional video games, we can have invisible walls that stop you from going there, and you can't do that in the real world. People will just walk into that room.
Yeah, if your story can't survive having any 10, 20-second section of it, if the player can't just miss that, and your story can't survive that, you only say everything once, or you have a reveal and you have to be there, and if you're not there for it, then your story doesn't make sense. It's not like a movie. If you have to pay attention to this section and you can't afford to have the player miss it, it's just not a story that's suited for an immersive environment, because the player will be distracted. We use mobile phones. They could receive a call, or they could see a friend and take their headphones off for 10 seconds. And we don't want them to be able to skip back necessarily, because that doesn't feel very immersive either. But you need a nice story that patches itself together and leaves enough space for the player to be doing some of the imaginative work, but also that can survive. It's not just dominoes. If one of those dominoes doesn't fall, the rest of them still need to go down the way you vaguely want them to.
And it was mentioned if people can just walk where they want, they don't have an AI, and then you get this problem with griefers potentially.
Yeah.
Well, and also too, I'd say that on a serious answer to the question instead of the mall thing, keep in mind kind of that where the magic circle is and how it affects people that aren't in on the joke. Always be mindful of context, right? How things appear to those who don't necessarily know what's going on when they see a guy, on the street get a hood thrown over his head and throw it into a black van and scoot it away. That's right. And even if the guy was prepared for that and knew that was happening, number one, I don't think it's a great idea. But for onlookers, if you're doing it in a public place, keep into contact. I know the people that have said, we're going to leave you a cache of, it's going to be in an ammo box left on a picnic table, in this post 9/11 world we live in. That sort of thing's not really a great idea for the people that aren't in on the game. And so there are a lot more ethical considerations that you have to take into consideration with these sorts of things.
Yeah, so in a way you're designing both for the player and for whoever's around them.
And
at the time.
onlookers. Yeah. Inadvertent onlookers.
If you're doing a multiplayer thing, and someone was talking to me about a design that they had, and it sounded like it was fun, but one of the problems is it was multiplayer and you're scavenging. And the items that you're scavenging could include things like a gun. And you just have to imagine that all over the world, out of context, you hear these two guys going, I got one, I found a gun, I got a gun. Did you get a gun? Yeah. Did you get ammo? I got ammo. Come on over here, I've got a gun. Those are the things that are not, those are the kind of the byproduct of what can happen. So we're in this kind of area where these tropes, these things that are very handy to have in a game, you have to think about, will someone say that out loud, standing in a park?
Consequences can become real.
Yeah.
If you're not careful.
Also beware of helpful players, because we had the launch, the first launch of one of our very first projects, the first 15 minutes, things started going haywire and we started getting bugs that we hadn't had before. And it turned out that it was because we were using Bluetooth beacons to provide very accurate, very local location data so that users could turn left or turn right down a corridor and have an immediate response, and that would represent an immediate choice that they were making. And a user had found one of our beacons where it was supposed to be, but thought someone might pick that up and do something with it. So I'm going to pick it up and return it to the guys. And not only were they then picking it up and moving it, in order to try and be helpful, this Good Samaritan, they were walking around with it in their pocket around the start area, looking for one of us to give it to, which meant that our players were getting a load of false positives from the end of the story, and the story was skipping, and we've put in failsafe so that doesn't happen now. But yeah, that kind of players who wanted to go the extra mile, you also need to build in a reward for them, rather than, so that everybody wants to feel like they know something that everybody else doesn't. That's why espionage works so well. So if you're going to let people see the strings of your game, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to reward them rather than go, thank you, I'll just go and put this beacon back where it's supposed to be now.
We're running a little short on time, so I do want to move forward. And speaking of legal and ethical concerns, one of the big controversies that came up with Pokemon Go was, of course, issues around trespassing, issues around privacy, issues around putting a Pokestop at the Holocaust Museum, things like that. How do we avoid those issues as writers and designers?
Well, first, realize they exist, which doesn't exactly occur to a lot of people. It is an interesting Brave New World we're in, because it does bring up the question of, like, the guy that wakes up one morning and his garden in his backyard is now a Pokestop to this multi-million-dollar game that he never consented to, and he's not sharing in the revenue, but somebody is using his private property to make money off of, basically. So there are these questions that honestly have yet to be resolved in a lot of ways. Most people don't mind, but then there's the curator of the Holocaust Museum, or there's a memorial in the middle of the town that was dedicated to a certain family that all died in World War II, and it's a very somber place. And there are all these little different use cases where it may not be appropriate to play a game. And so right now it's easy right now. You can say, well, we'll contact the makers of the game and we'll have them opt us out. But then again, if you're a big player, and you may have your own IP and you may have your own area where you may not want somebody else's IP to be invading on yours. I won't mention any amusement park names, that may be an issue there. I mean, so there are all these considerations that I think aren't going to go away. They're only going to get more exacerbated as we go on, and there's going to be more and more of these games as geolocation games become more mainstream, which I really think they are going to be now that everybody knows what Pokemon Go is. So that's an issue.
We have a way of blacklisting those sites using our tech, but it's like it needs to be centralized. Is everybody, who's constantly having people trespassing, going to have to figure out who published the game? How do I get a hold of that person? So, yeah, you're right. That's a larger question.
So I think about it like this, that if you're playing Pokemon Go and you see a Pokemon on the other side of a chain link fence and you can't get at it, that is not the game not functioning as designed. That is a feature. That's not a bug. That is the way that the game introduces exciting elements to make the real world more interesting. The real world also introduces obstacles to make the game more interesting. But the world is full of all kinds of fences, and fences affect some people more than others for reasons of gender or race or physical ability. And the world is full of unpleasant realities that some people have to deal with more than others. And I think the minute we're working in augmented reality, we have a responsibility to reality and the player's reality, and to take that into account. And so if your game, if it operates in reality, that means that some people will have an experience of it which might be limited, for example, or you might not feel able or comfortable walking around at night looking for Pokemon in your neighborhood or someone else's neighborhood, and that means that experience is locked off for you. And we have to be able to take that into account and to kind of write art that can adapt to that, or that at least, takes it into account.
Yeah. No, I think it's important that anybody that's designing for these real-world games is putting at the top of their list examining their own design bias. And what are you bringing to the table that you're unknowingly laying on everybody who's playing and not playing this experience that you're crafting. So I think surrounding yourself with intelligent people, surrounding yourself with community organizations that know way more and better than you do, surrounding yourself with experts in various fields. I also think there's going to be a lot of dialogue between urban planners and game designers, which is going to be good and messy and great. But I think the first thing is to ask really uncomfortable questions and see what happens.
Yeah, and hire diversely. People will know things that you don't. So the last 2 minutes before we have some time for questions, I do want to touch on briefly sort of the business side of this. You mentioned you think that this will become a bigger thing now that Pokemon Go has happened. Do we think that was just a flash in the pan, or is there actually market growth potential here?
Yeah, it's going to work.
I mean, okay, Pokemon Go is lightning in a bottle. There are a lot of things happening to contribute to its success. I mean, IP being the foremost of that. But what it has done, it has become a success case, and it makes it easier to pitch these projects. So you can say, oh yeah, it's Pokemon Go meets Harry Potter or whatever, and people will understand what that is. And so when we add to that, new technologies are going to come along. Eventually, wearables, something's going to become acceptable socially and technologically. I mean, the technology is going to increase, and being able to use not only your location, but being able to use augmented reality to do the thing and say, yeah, there's a dragon flying around, and there's King Kong up on the building, and that could give some really big potential. Again, there's a little bit of unknown. There's a lot of people still aren't quite sure. But, I mean, it's not going to go away, I don't think. I mean, people are going to try new things, try different things, and the technology is going to go forward. And I think it's a great thing.
Yeah. Obviously, Pokemon Go made money. I
we were
assume
talking
you've
about
heard.
money, sorry.
But can other experiences like this make money?
Yeah, yes, totally. So I think the Go game has been a really interesting trial balloon or test case on how play how the market of play has changed over the years. When they first started, this is well before I got there, it was just fun. It was just to have a good time and send people off to do goofy things in public. And I remember being told around 2008 that shifted dramatically, where all of a sudden the majority of our clients were coming to us and saying, we're having a morale crisis because the world is crazy, the economy is crazy, people who are in the workplace are going through unprecedented levels of stress and pressure. We need play as a way to let go of that for a second, just to take a deep breath and enjoy ourselves. And then, since then it's changed again and again. We see play being used as a recruitment tool. We see play, we've always seen play used as an educational tool, which I think is great. And I'm passionate about applied play, about using play towards something that you wouldn't necessarily think it could be useful for, and which is how the whole zombie disaster preparedness games came about, because we wanted to tackle something that people have a natural aversion to. How many people have an emergency kit? Okay, good. Oh, good. More preppers than normal. But for everyone who doesn't, by the way, I didn't for a very long time, I'm willing to wager that part of the reason why you haven't is because you haven't gotten around to it. It's kind of boring to, buy granola bars on your Saturday, or you're not doing it with friends. It's intimidating even to think about the reality. So using play to switch those emotions around and instead making preparedness something that is memorable and social and engaging and fun. There are so many different industries and challenges that we could be taking the mechanics of play and applying towards creating new outcomes. So that, and we're seeing a demand for that, which I think is really interesting. People want to really maximize play as a tool to solve all of these different problems.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, so we have time for one question at each microphone for the first people that stand up.
Can I add something about the revenue thing just
Yes.
really quickly? There is one really unique opportunity that I've seen with geolocation games, and Pokemon Go has started to do it, is that presents itself, and that is brand partnerships in a unique way. I mean, they've got one of the first things was McDonald's in Japan saying, oh, we're going to have these special Pokemon that only show up at McDonald's. A multi-million-dollar deal, that was a great example. And that's not possible in other, I mean, that's the first time something like that has happened. It's kind of a unique new way of you grab people and you point them to your brand, and their gameplay is enhanced by doing that. So that's just a unique
And
thing.
I think that DLC is a viable,
Yes,
viable
DLC.
business model.
Obviously, and
You have a
obviously-
campaign.
So
Yeah.
we're going to be in the wrap-up room afterwards to continue talking. We can talk about how to get started in this stuff because we don't have time. But I just do want to take 2 quick questions. So right there.
Just sort of, I guess, going off this topic, I'm working on a game right now for a museum, and I just wanted to talk about, or ask you, sort of best practices for working with a client, making sure that you're sort of incorporating whatever data or, that they want to be conveying to their visitors, or, if it's a commercial project, their clients or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
Because we've done kind of museum and place stuff in listed buildings or buildings that are kind of historic or very protective of their fabric. Reassure the venue that you're not going to damage the fabric of the building. That is, if they're not saying it, that definitely is something that they're thinking about. Mm-hmm. And I mean, hell, there's the example of is it Minnesota, who tried to now ban Pokemon Go because the volume of people visiting the park damaged their parks. Which surely that's the park operating as designed. But just reassure them that that's not going to be the case and that it's just going to be a fun kind of foot traffic rather than a scary kind of foot traffic.
We will continuing answering that in the
Yes.
wrap-up room. Right over here.
Hi, I'm a law student, and my area of developing expertise is property rights and augmented reality games. So I'm really curious to hear if any of you have had any actual legal problems, and also how you interact with lawyers to kind of preempt these issues. I know you guys all touched on it, but I'm really interested.
I would love to talk to you offline after this.
When we're not being recorded.
Disclaimer, very strong disclaimers, and constantly, guiding the player, reminding the player to be safe, to actually try to effectively prevent a problem is one of the most important things, I think. And then if you have a backup user agreement, but.
Yeah, that takes up a big part of the design process, is getting the proper permitting and making sure your I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So I think it's definitely going to be in a developing space where it's going to come. You're in the right place.
You are in the right
good
place.
work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. We will be in the wrap-up room just across the hall, and tonight at the secret location around 6 o'clock if you want to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for coming, guys.